And the Honourable Member for Cowichan, Malahat Langford.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'm glad to have this opportunity to join the debate on Bill C-69. It's an opportunity which unfortunately many colleagues in this House will not be able to do because we're currently debating it under time allocation, and so we have a limit to debate of 5 hours. But that being the case, here we are. Mr. Speaker, I want to walk the House through a little bit of a history lesson. If we go back to the 2015 election, the Liberals, and in particularly the Prime Minister, really made a lot of promises during that campaign, and one of them was a repeated promise that if the Liberals were elected, they would immediately restore a strengthened federal environmental assessment process. They made a commitment that they would not approve any projects without first enacting that strengthened assessment process to ensure that decisions were based on science, facts, and evidence, and that they would serve the public interest. And in fact, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister made a visit to British Columbia. He came to Vancouver Island to the community of Esquimalt, and people will know Esquimalt because that is the home of the Canadian Forces bases, the main Pacific Naval Base for Canada. And he came to Esquimalt on August 20th of 2015, and he was asked specifically about this promise in the context of Kinder Morgan. And he said quite clearly that the Kinder Morgan pipeline process, the review process, would have to be redone under stronger and more credible rules. But Mr. Speaker, what we have before us today with Bill C-69 is a gargantuan bill, clocking in at 364 pages, which is too little too late, because we're now debating a bill after this government has approved Kinder Morgan and after it has announced a purchase of the pipeline. Like, we're debating it today. The government made the announcement last week. So it comes to us 28 months, roughly, give or take, since the Liberals were elected. And, you know, clocking in at 364 pages, I've heard other members of Parliament express in this place that this bill should have gone to 3 separate committees. It should have gone to the Transport Committee, it should have gone to the Natural Resources Committee, and it should have gone to the Environment Committee, so that each of those collective bodies, with the experience and the knowledge that members attain while working on them, could have studied the constituent parts and called forth the appropriate witnesses. Instead, one committee was entrusted to this monumental task, this Herculean task, and I know from the member from Edmonton Strathcona the efforts that she put through to listen to the evidence, to try and put forward amendments to see that this bill actually lived up to the promises that this Liberal government had made. And unfortunately, due to the time constraints and due to the Liberal members on the committee not really listening to her, most of those amendments were defeated. So here we are, Mr. Speaker, at the report stage of the bill. And, you know, I also want to go back to the time before Bill C-69 was introduced, because the Liberals keep on saying that Kinder Morgan did go through a review process, a renewed review process. Well, let's just examine what they in fact set up. They had set up what was known as a ministerial review panel. And in fact, that panel admitted that it lacked the time, it lacked the technical expertise and the resources to fill the gaps in the National Energy Board process. And it ended up with little more than questions that remained unanswered. They kept no public records of hearings, admitted that the meetings were hastily organized, and confirmed that they had a serious lack of public confidence in the National Energy Board and its recommendations. And Mr. Speaker, I attended one of those meetings when they came to Victoria. I remember the room unanimously coming out against Kinder Morgan. And just, you know, it was really kind of a slapdash piece of work. Despite all of the setbacks of this ministerial review panel, they still came out and acknowledged that Kinder Morgan's Trans Mountain pipeline proposal cannot proceed without a serious reassessment of its impacts on climate change commitments, Indigenous rights, and marine mammal safety. So they, in a sense, were acknowledging the huge problems that existed with this project. And, you know, Liberals keep on openly wondering why there is such passionate opposition to this project, specifically in British Columbia, where the risks are very much concentrated. It's because people did not have faith in the previous process. And they many of them were lured to vote Liberal. They had hope in a new Liberal government that they would actually live up to their promises. Instead, what they got was a ministerial review panel, judgment passed by the Liberal government before the fact, and now this bill, C-69, which still has many problematic elements. And one of the big ones is the fact that the Minister of the Environment still has an arbitrary right to monitor environmental projects. This leaves them open to political influences instead of scientific evidence. And Mr. Speaker, you know, governments come and go. We may have an environment minister in one government who the public can trust and know that that person's heart is in the right place, but say a new government comes in that has completely different leanings. If you give that kind of power to a minister, you know, they can sway their decisions according to which way the political winds blow. And that is not the way to enact strong scientific consensus-based decision-making. And Mr. Speaker, I want to, you know, start framing this debate a little bit more in the context of Kinder Morgan. You know, the very fact that this government has made promises also to get rid of subsidies to the oil and gas sector, and that we are now last in the G7, and you know, the government's trying to strive to a 2025 goal. But the very fact that they paid $4.5 billion for a 65-year-old pipeline, one that exports diluted bitumen, and this is just the cost of the existing infrastructure and not anything that's going to come from it. And you know, I hear members from all sides talk about a national energy strategy, but you know, this pipeline is serving foreign interests. It is not accumulating the best value for our product. Diluted bitumen is the lowest grade of crude you can export. That's why it fetches the lowest prices. And expanding the Kinder Morgan's capacity is not going to change the price. I see no incentive, and I've seen no evidence that customers will be willing to pay more for the same product just because we can ship more volume. And the existing pipeline exports 99% of it down to California. So I'd like to see evidence of all these buyers who are lining up the door from Asia, because they're currently not buying what Kinder Morgan is exporting today. Now, the Liberals like to come up with the favorite phrase that the environment and the economy go hand in hand. And there's a few things that's wrong with this, because it supposes that the environment and the economy are equal partners. That's not the case. I would argue that there is a relationship, but that the economy is very much the junior partner, because, Mr. Speaker, when we start affecting our environment, when we start polluting the waterways, and we see the effects of climate change, the economic ravages that can have far outweigh any of the benefits that we can get. And there are economic opportunities in keeping in line with our environmental goals if we start making the right investments into renewable energy. We have to see the way the world is going. This is 2018. There's a trend. And I want our country to take advantage of the economic opportunities of the 21st century economy and not be investing in something that rightfully belongs in the 20th century. And along the way, Mr. Speaker, we have to be speaking to current energy workers. We have to ensure that they are coming along with us. No, everyone acknowledges the oil sands are not going to stop production tomorrow, but we need to have a plan where we talk about the just transition of those workers to bring them with us into the new energy economy so that Canada is best placed for the 21st century.
Bravo.
Mr. Speaker, I also want to talk about the Liberals' vote for Bill C-262 last week and how little those commitments mean this week, because the member for Edmonton Strathcona has tried repeatedly, both at the committee and now at report stage, to insert language into Bill C-69 which will actually live up to what Bill C-262 does. Bill C-262 seeks to bring the laws of Canada into harmony with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And if you look at all of the report stage amendments, the motions, you can see that the member for Edmonton Strathcona is trying to insert language in there which acknowledges the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, acknowledges the Constitution Act 1982, and all of our commitments. But I have been questioning Liberals repeatedly on this. Will they at least have some consistency and vote in support of those amendments following their support for C-262? So, Mr. Speaker, I see my time is running up. I'll conclude by saying that, this bill is too little too late. There are gaps in it that you could drive a bus through, and while we can appreciate some elements of the bill, we have to look at the whole thing. And when it's this large, there are just far too many negatives. They outweigh the positives, and so that's why the NDP is going to withhold its support for this bill. We were hoping for a lot more, and frankly, so were the Canadian people.
Bravo.